Hey everybody, this is Wednesday night and it's the Oosthuisen show. Tonight I don't have Christopher with me. He is hanging out in sunny Dominican Republic, hanging out on the beach. Actually, he's not really hanging out, he's actually watching us from there. He's been helping me for the last 5 minutes here, getting all the technical side ready. But it's just me you got tonight, so we're going to try and keep this a little shorter than normal, 30 minutes, and make it as intense as what I can get, as much information as what I can get into it, and hopefully you guys will learn something from this and so on. So tonight we're going to be talking about resource guarding. Resource guarding, where dogs take like a control point issue around a toy, something along those lines, resource guarding. But before I get to that, just a quick word from our sponsor. Obviously, our main sponsor, as you well know, is Partners Dog Training, the school that I founded, oh gosh, some 25 years ago here in North Phoenix. We were down in Scottsdale earlier than that. But during that time, we've trained literally tens of thousands of dogs, pretty much seen everything that you can imagine, and we're still doing it. One of my favorite programs at the moment, you guys got to sign up for this, is snake avoidance training. This morning, I think I went through about 30 dogs, got a great team of people helping me train. Had some really interesting dogs today, met some interesting people. If you're ever interested in animal behavior, come and watch our snake avoidance program. You'll be fascinated. It's really interesting to see how the dogs go from the curiosity and wanting to approach the snakes all the way to heck no, I want nothing to do with that. Something we're doing a little differently this year is that we've moved one of our cages into kind of a neat opening, but you're going to have to come see what it looks like. I'm not going to tell you what it is at the moment, but it's in an area where we can get a little bit more odor onto the dogs, a little bit more scent, and it's working like a dream. I had a bunch of people, clients watching this morning. They would come and look, and pretty much every one of them walked away with a sense of, wow, that's really fascinating. So, the second sponsor we have, of course, is our HeyLudwig program. Our HeyLudwig app is an app that we've been working on for some time. It's Christopher's kind of baby, but we've been putting data into it that we've been collecting over the last, 4 or 5 years. It allows you to, if you go to HeyLudwig on Facebook, it allows you to look up your dog's problems, have a look and see, and it kind of creates a program or a training routine just for you and your dog. Go check it out. Let us know what you think. It's something that I think will be huge down the road. It's other than just going online and checking out, looking up YouTube, saying, what is this, what's that. The problem with a lot of those videos, they're very generalized, and general information sometimes can be risky. To give you an example, with snake avoidance training this morning, I had a dog come in that just wanted nothing to do with the snakes, and of course the first thing we're going to think is, oh well, that's because he's responding correctly. But in actual fact, he had a negative association with the collar that we had on the dog, and that's because the owners only use the harness. And so it took us a while to get that training done, and that of course is what makes it interesting. So check out HeyLudwig and let us know what you think. Next week, just before I forget, I think if I remember correctly, Christopher, you and I, we talked about doing, what was it again? I'll come back to that. We had a discussion going as to what, we had a couple of options available to us, and I wasn't sure what we would get. So Christopher, just shoot me a message, let me know what we had decided finally at that stage. So, one of the big things I did this week is I mentioned to a bunch of you guys on Facebook, hey, what is it that we can do to attract more attention, to get people to listen to the podcast more? I believe this is really good information, and I had a really great interaction. It was on my personal Facebook page, and you guys are always welcome to go check that out. But basically, the main consensus was that it's the time of day that we're doing this. It's only at 6 o'clock, so we're looking at making a change to that. We might go a little bit later. But also, one of the things that came up, is this available on Spotify and on iTunes? And the answer is, it is. I actually went and checked this week, and if you search for, it's very easy, just go to the search term, put in Oosthuisen, Oosthuisen. Yeah, I know, it's kind of tough, but just put that in. There's no other Oosthuisen that's going to come up, and you hit it, nail it, and all the podcasts we've done so far are on that thing. So go check it out, and if you watch it on that, shoot me a message and let me know that you watched it. Let me know how, did you find it interesting? Was it easy to find? The more information we get from you guys, the better a job we can do at helping you out. So, I got something I got to show you guys. Christopher's going to kill me because so I don't know if you can see that. I got this on Sunday at our club one of the clubs that I belong to. It's actually one of the clubs I joined about 26 years ago. It's called Cactus Combat League. It's one of the oldest clubs in our sport, and I've been a member there, as I said, for 25, 26 years now. Great group of people. We've got some really awesome clubs here in Arizona that I shoot at. It's a target shooting. But one of the cool things that I got, and this ties into tonight's story, so I brought it along, is that I was fortunate enough to win the Open champion for the year for 2018. Now, here's the funny thing. I have tons and tons of trophies at home. I have lots of, little awards and so forth. I actually enjoy them all. Some people don't like them. Some people think it's a waste of time. For me, that's a reward. And this, for me, was a huge reward because I haven't actually won this before, despite having competed there for many, many years. And it kind of ties into our little story here tonight, because what happened is that shortly after I got it, I actually filled it up with water. It's a water bottle, in case you're wondering. It's got a little water flask here. And I put it in the chair where I was shooting. And the next thing I look at my daughter, who'd come out to shooting with me, she picked it up and she was going to take a drink. And I was like, what are you doing? Don't drink out of my water bottle. And she's like, oh, Dad, can I have some of your water? And all of a sudden I caught myself and I was like, man, I'm resource guarding that water. So it ties perfectly into our program tonight, because it just shows you that resource guarding can come anywhere. It's not just about your dog. It can be people. It can be your children. Lots of kids will resource guard a toy or something that they feel to be of value to them. I've watched Alessandra sometimes want to take some of one of Christopher's things, and Christopher's like, leave my stuff alone. And I'm like, dude, what do you care? It's just a silly little thing. It could be whatever, right? One of the cute things that my daughter has done is that she often likes to give gifts to people, and obviously she doesn't have the money to go out and buy things because she has a little bit of chore money coming in, but she'll take one of her prize gifts and she'll go give it to my dad as a gift. And it's so cute because that's her way of giving back, and it ties into that same thing. That the thing I like about that is that she's not guarding that resource, that she's not holding on to that toy because it's hers and she's not going to share it with anybody else. So we talk about dogs. Let's get into that subject, because obviously that's what you guys are here for, is we're talking about the dog training. And while I'm talking, of course, as you all know, shoot a message. Let me know you're watching. I've got it set up tonight a little differently so I can actually see as you guys jump in. But what I'm really looking for is input. Like, tell us some of the stories you got, and then I can actually answer that a little bit later in the program and go to that. So when you talk about resource guarding, we've got a couple of things, and I've got some notes here so that I don't leave stuff out, because a lot of times when I'm chatting with you guys, I leave out some of the points, and then later on when I go back to, I've got to add those notes in, and then we haven't spoken about that. So we break resource guarding up into two categories. The first thing with resource guarding is we try and prevent dogs from becoming resource guarders, right? So resource guarding, as I said, is where you give a dog a toy, or it could be their food, or it could even be water, it could be space, but let's just talk about food and water for right now. And the dog basically says, it's a survival instinct. Like, if I give up that water, then I could die because now I don't have enough water. So it's something we have to train. So when we approach resource guarding, we look at it from two different angles. One is how to train a dog correctly so that they don't become resource guarders. And then two, what to do if you're struggling with that. And then that gets broken down into just basic struggling, meaning a dog is displaying some resource guarding issues and we need to correct that. We need to kind of like maybe change the mindset, redirect it to something else. And then you get the extreme resource guarding. And I've got to bring that up because, and one of the things, just to digress for a second, that I really am going to do somehow, some way, and we've walked and talked about a couple of things, Christopher and myself. I want to be able to show you video, because I've got some really good video of a dog resource guarding, maybe a year ago, that was extreme. I mean, this dog would really try and take you out if you came anywhere near his food. He would growl, he would put his face down, he would kind of keep his mouth over the thing, and if you got more than about 2-3 feet from him, he would just charge flying straight at you, and obviously if he could get you, he's going to bite you. So that's the extreme side, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to it. But one of the things I want to always caution everybody, resource guarding can escalate really fast. So pay attention to how extreme or how serious your case is. If you have a little puppy that's kind of just being a little possessive of its toy, regarding its toy, that could be minor, that could be no big deal. But if you have a dog that is displaying fairly significant reactivity issues, meaning growling and lunging, trying to bite, not the sort of the fake bite, and I'm always cautious when I say that. There's a really famous video that's out there with a chihuahua, and the guy reaches over to chihuahua and the dog goes roar and sort of bites his hand, brings his hand back, he does it again, and it becomes this game. Well, that's become a game. So even though that dog in effect is resource guarding, he's unlikely to really get crazy about it. Now, there was a case this week, and I don't know if you guys are watching, and it's something that we as trainers, we need to pay attention to, and especially as clients and dog owners. There's a case this week where a kid he had a sock in his hand, and from what I'm told, the story, I'm not 100% sure about all this, because a lot of times when you read stuff in the media, we don't get the full story. So it's very dangerous for me as a behavioral trainer to try and evaluate a behavior based on what we're reading in the media. But having said that, so what happened is that the child, from what I understand, had a glove on his hand and he stuck it through the fence, and I think there were two huskies on the other side. They saw this item, they grabbed it. Now, it's not strictly resource guarding. It's, you know, you could almost say that's almost like a territorial behavior as well. It could be just a prey drive for the dogs. We don't really know what went through the dog's minds on the other side. But anyway, the bottom line is that the dog took a part of, we don't know how much, but a part of the child's hand right off. And, you know, obviously had to call 911, and they managed to bandage the hand up, but they couldn't find the hand. The dog actually ingested the piece of the hand or whatever. It was probably a small child. When I say probably, it was a small child, so it was probably a small hand. But again, you know, guarding and any kind of territorial behavior can escalate really fast. So whenever we talk about these things, and especially when I have clients that come in and when we work on these things, we're very cognizant of the fact that, you know, things can escalate very, very quickly. So basic training, intermediate training, extreme situations, they get applied differently. Okay, having said all that stuff, thanks to lawyers, having said all that stuff, let's talk about basic resource training of your dog, right? So a couple of things we want to do. First of all, when we're talking about resource guarding, it's something that can be avoided. And so what we want to do is we want to teach our puppies, and I'm just going to use the term puppy, but a puppy would be anything from a couple of months, few months old, all the way up to maybe a dog of like a couple of years, year and a half. Some dogs mature later, so a lot of times you'll get a 2-year-old that's still got a lot of puppy in them. But generally we're talking about a few months to maybe a year and a half of age is what I would refer to as a young dog or an adolescent or a puppy, right? So if we're training a puppy, we want to teach the puppy that pretty much everything that they have belongs to us. A really simple way to test that is offer them a treat and see how they take the treat. Now, this is something that comes up in puppy training all the time, is that we give a dog a treat and the dog like grabs at that treat and that's mine and I'm out of here. And so we have to train them like, hey, take it nicely. And that's the real purpose of teaching the dog to be nice. In other words, gently, or take it nicely, or easy, any of those kind of words. They slow the dog down, you teach them. A lot of times what I'll do is, let's just assume this cap that I've got here, I think you guys can see that. So let's say that this is the treat. I'll actually close it down in my hand and let the dog sniff it. So I'll hold it like this, let the dog sniff into my hand that way, and then they can smell that there's food there, but it's not enough for them to try and grab at it. Again, you could get a dog that'll grab at it, but then we have to deal with something more extreme. Right now we're talking puppy, right? So once the puppy is sniffing at it, then I'll gradually just open up my hand and then I'll let the dog take it out of the flat of my hand. If you do this and you offer it to a dog like that, you run the risk that the dog is going to lunge at that or snap at that. It could be just part of puppy, and obviously then they're going to, you know, the difference between the treat and your fingers is an inch. And there's a good chance that you're going to get bitten on the finger. What happens then is you yelp, you pull your hand away, and then you get mad at the dog. The dog doesn't understand what they've done wrong. All they've done is grab the treat, and this fits back in that category that I always talk about of don't do something that your dog perceives as, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? When in actual fact it's something that you should be correcting or you should be training properly. So back to the resource guarding. So what we want to do is we want to build up that behavior slowly. Once the dog gets the treat, they learn to take it nicely. You tell them, yes, good dog. You pay them with something. We talk about paying the dog is giving them a treat or something like that, or verbally praising them. Yes, good dog. All right. So now that we've got that down, now we want to go to the next level. You want to, if a dog has a toy, you want to teach them like, hey, if you give me your toy, if you trade me that toy, I'll give you something. Now, whenever I say that, and especially when I'm teaching in a class or something, then people say, well, aren't we bribing the dog, or aren't we kind of like, you know, paying like a ransom to the dog to get the toy back? Yeah, you are to a certain extent in the beginning, but what you're really looking for is that the dog learns to give that item up and be rewarded for that. So if your dog does think that you're bribing them, then we're going to back that up a little bit. And we're going to say, okay, I'm not going to ask you to give it to me. I'm just going to hold the treat in my hand. I'm going to wait for you to do something. Sometimes you've got to be patient with this. If the dog drops it, the moment they drop it, you say yes, and you pay them. The reward should come after they give up the toy. Sometimes I'll take the toy from the dog. Other times I'll let them just drop the toy, depending on the level of exposure that I want to the puppy at that stage. Whenever we're training the give to me and so forth, then remember to use a cue. So I like to use just a simple 1 or 2 syllable command, like to hand is one of the bird dog people use. If you say to hand, that means give me the toy, or give it up, give it to me, in mine, or give to me, something like that. Any of those kinds of words. It doesn't have to mean anything. You can basically talk in Chinese for like here, but basically I'm looking for a cue that tells the dog, hey, when I say that, you're going to give me that. And remember that the reward comes at the end of giving you the toy. Again, we're talking puppies here, okay? Now we go from the puppy into the young adolescent, a dog that is already being a little resource guarding and so forth. A lot of times using positive training with that is not successful. So with a puppy, we're using positive training. You might also have to use a little bit more compulsion on the puppy, or a little bit more pressure. But for the most part, we're going to use praising or positive training. Whenever I say positive, I think of my friend that has a fit when I use the word positive, but just basically it's that there's no punishment involved. In other words, you're doing something, the dog's getting something, you're paying the dog for that, right? It's a positive thing. When we go into more corrective style training, that's where you're going to say to the dog, no, or or give it to me. So let's assume they've grabbed a toy, and when I say toy, I now want to kind of like get into something else, which often comes up at this point. So sometimes it's not about toys, sometimes it could be something like underwear. That's a common issue with dogs, is that they'll grab or steal underwear, and it's normally soiled underwear, and before you get all embarrassed about it, it's a common problem. We come across it all the time, and most of the time the reason why it's soiled is because that has the strongest odor on it. So your dog really kind of like connects with that odor. It feels comfortable, it feels good, and when they've got that, then they want to keep that. Now obviously chewing and eating your underwear is a bad idea, so if a dog tends to get into resource guarding of underwear or stealing of your underwear, that's something you definitely want to address. We've had lots of dogs come into the kennels, and then a day or 2 days later they're pooping underwear. Everyone thinks it's really funny, but the truth is that could be a much more serious situation. If that underwear or that fabric gets jammed up in the intestines or whatever, you're required to do surgery, and that escalates into something more serious. Talking about pictures earlier on, I mentioned that about 10 years, 8 to 10 years ago, I was at a vet, and the vet said, hey, come here, I want to show you something. And he went in, and they were doing surgery on a dog, and they were taking grass out of this dog's stomach. And you're not going to believe this. I wonder if I have a dog bowl here. I don't see a bowl in my office. But they had a dog bowl that was, I'd say, about a 12-inch dog bowl, and it was piled full of grass, like absolutely full. And they were taking all this grass out of the dog's stomach and intestines. That dog would have basically died. So what possessed that dog to eat all that grass, I have absolutely no idea. But even though that wasn't resource guarding, I'm just mentioning it because dogs that guard will often eat things and swallow and ingest things, and that's obviously very significant. Okay, so now we've got the dog, they've grabbed the toy, they grabbed underwear, they've got something, you need them to give it up. Depending on the dog, again, extreme cases, we're going to use something different. To a dog that's sort of in the middle of the line, we're going to use our training. We're going to say to the dog like, and you're going to try and get them to release that item by putting pressure on the dog. Now, this is where your training comes in. This morning at snake avoidance training, I had a client come up, beautiful dog. I don't want to say which dog it is because she might not like me telling the story, but beautiful dog. And this dog did really well in its training in the snake avoidance training, because it had a really solid background in training, right? And I actually complimented. I said, this is great. If all the dogs were trained as well as your dog was, it would make my life so much easier. And she was super happy about that, obviously. But training is the foundation of all our things. We want to really put a lot of effort, teaching your dog heel work, teaching them sit, teaching them to come to you on command. All of those things make your life easier if it does come to a resource guarding issue later on, at 8 months, a year and a half of age. If you ever wonder about that year and a half of age, just imagine that a year and a half old dog is the equivalent of a teenager in humans. So, they go through a phase. Some people believe it's hormones. Some people believe it's because they've got more testosterone. The vets argue that the testosterone really is created up until about a year of age, and then it diminishes after that. So that doesn't really explain the 18-month thing. But there's no question that around 18 months to 2 years of age is when we see the majority of our problem behaviors that start exhibiting in serious problems, right? So when I refer to that 18-month-old, that's generally what I'm talking about. It could be a little younger, it could be a little older. In some of the stronger breeds, the more dominant breeds, it's a little younger, and in some of the toy breeds, it might be a little bit older. But that's really being very general of something that's not actually general. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our training. If your dog does not give up that toy, then you've got to escalate to a next level, right? And you've got to put a leash on your dog, and you basically leave the toy in the dog's mouth, do a little heel work, a little obedience, heel, forwards, sit, tell your dog sit. The training will start taking over your foundation, taking over the dog's mindset. Your foundation kind of replaces or suppresses that dog's abilities and wish to be more dominant, right? We want to try and take that out. And a lot of times that's when you'll find they'll drop the toy. The moment they drop the toy, you say, good dog, and you pay them at that stage, right? Now, I wouldn't just reach down and pick up that toy because it depends on the dog. If you have a dog that's reactive and you reach down, pick up the toy, your face is exposed, your dog basically goes back into that defense stage again where they might go for the toy or react or lunge at the toy. We don't want to do it. So basically what I always tell people is once they drop the toy, just walk on, turn around, stop, sit your dog, walk back to the toy, pick up the toy, then come back to your dog again. So you leave your dog where they are, go pick up the toy. If you can't do a sit-stay with your dog, you may have to do another thing. And what the easiest way to do that is I always walk where I'm near a pole or a tree or something, and I'll just walk around the pole, and I'll leave my leash looped around the pole and then back to where I'm standing, so the dog can't actually come towards me because the pole is holding them in the back position. They don't even realize that they're doing that, and obviously then it makes it a lot safer for you to pick up the toy. That actually comes from the extreme training side. We'll use that a little bit later on here when we get to that stage. Okay, so just make sure I've covered all my notes that I went through. Always remember, don't try and do everything in one shot. Do it step by step. Try and build it up in a gradual, control way. Try and avoid getting really upset or emotional about it. Don't do yelling and screaming at them, because most of the time that screaming, which we all do, by the way, everybody yells at their dogs, so don't feel bad. But for the most part, it doesn't help. What it does is kind of increases the drive, it increases the energy, and that makes the dog even more determined to hang on. Do not get into a tug of war. A lot of times, dog will grab on, you'll grab the other side, and they'll tug, fighting backwards like that. This is not a game. You're in control of the game. So you hold on to the toy, you tell them, cut it out, stop. Doesn't matter what the words are that you use. It's basically a tone of voice. You could literally say there, A, B, C, D, E, H, F, whatever the case is, teaching them, hey, I'm in control. This is my toy, okay? If you have a situation where the dog is starting to get a little on the edge, where you're nervous that they might actually bite or something, they're not quite at the extreme case stage yet, but they're sort of in between, you know, in it's fine versus it's extreme. Then what you can also do is you can clip a leash onto the toy and just let it hang down, or you buy yourself, in fact, I think I got one. Yep, I'll grab it here quickly behind me. You grab it, get a toy like this that's got a handle on the one side. If the dog's got this end, basically it allows you to grab the handle on the end and gently just remove the toy from the dog's mouth, okay? The purpose, of course, of having the handle is that you're not putting your hand anywhere near the dog's face, so it allows you to be a little bit safer at that stage. Okay, let's talk about the extreme cases. Now, before I get into this, I almost don't want to talk about it on our Facebook Live show, because I'm always worried about somebody getting hurt. And obviously getting hurt is a catastrophic situation. We don't want that to happen. It introduces a really bad situation with the dog. You're upset, the dog could get into trouble, rabies animal control could get involved. A lot of the issues that we see, especially like in kids and in youngsters, where when they reach for the toy from the dog, they bend down, they reach for that toy, the dog bites them in the face. Those are significant bites. Those almost always lead to quarantine and, you know, quite potentially a dog being put down. So, you know, we obviously, as trainers and as pet people, we want to try and avoid all those situations. If you've rescued your dog, if a dog has grown up in a situation where they had to compete for their food, dogs that come off the reservation, dogs that come out of Mexico, dogs that have been in really big litters where they had to fight for their food. Maybe they weren't getting enough food or something. That's the subject for another day, but very, very big litters, they've got to have multiple feeders for them. Otherwise, there's too much competition. And the more dominant dogs, I don't want to say alpha dogs, the dogs that just got a little bit more energy and strength, they'll always get more food. And then the softer, weaker, you could almost say the runts of the puppies, the runts of the litter, they'll go less and less and less food. So, you know, when you have really big litters, that's also a time that you want to be careful if you have a breed, or if you buy a dog from a breeder and so on. That's the story we were talking about, is how to buy a dog, how to go find a dog for yourself, and how to measure the dog. So I think that's what we're going to talk about. I haven't been watching my notes here because I've been talking to you guys. See if Christopher wrote back to me and answered that question. But I know that was a subject that we were talking about doing, and it actually came from a client question. They're getting a new dog and they were asking, do we have any tips and some advice? And that's something that I definitely want to do. So I think we'll do that next week. Anyway, so to go back to the resource guarding side of it. So when you have these extreme situations where there's a strong potential for risk, then I want you to be extra careful. You definitely have got to do some training on your dog first. We don't want to use resource guarding as the first line of approach to training your dog not to resource guard, because if it escalates and it gets more serious, you've got a significant problem on your hands. Secondly, you want to take precautions. So a lot of times we'll work through a fence and we'll hand feed a dog through a fence, and we'll look to see what reaction we get from the dog. If they're snatching at the food, then there's a chance that they resource guard. If we have a dog that's resource guarding, we'll bring them into a kennel. We'll put the leash through the kennel so we can use a slight correction, not a heavy correction, but a slight correction leash, and we can reach reach for the toy, but we're actually not getting the toy at all because we're on the outside of the fence, and we can measure the dog's response to that. Again, these are extreme cases. Here at the school at Partners, we get a lot of extreme cases that come in. We're basically one of 1 or 2 schools out there that is the last line for these dogs. That's nice. I love that reputation, but at the same time, it puts a lot of pressure on us as a training staff, because we know if we can't succeed in what we're doing, then chances are that dog's going to be euthanized. So we get a lot of these extreme cases where it's been allowed to escalate, and now we're in the predicament of if we can't fix it, then basically the dog's going to be dead. And that's something that's hard to live with. So we have a lot of these measures that we put in. One is using the fence, making sure we can't get hurt. That's obviously catastrophic. It would be stupid for a trainer to put themselves at risk, despite what a lot of trainers think, that they're totally impervious to being bitten. Anybody can be bitten by a dog. So that's one measure. The second one is back chaining or back tying a dog. Sorry, not back chaining, back tying a dog. That's basically where you put a leash on, maybe a long line. A long line is a long 25, 30-foot long leash. You can buy them at a pet store. You can buy them at horse stores, tack stores. It's a lunging rope for a lot of horse people. We just have our own ones that we get made. We clip that on the dog, and we'll back tie that to a pole or a tree, and in your home you can tie it to a couch or something that's secure that your dog can't come forward. And then what we do is we'll put the food down, or the toy. I use toys all the time as an example, but it could be a toy, it could be food, it could be water. We'll put the food down, but out of reach of the dog. And then we'll look to see what response we get from the dog. If the dog's behaving, then we'll nudge the food closer and let them eat. And if they start changing, if they start fluffing themselves up, start growling, showing anything, then we'll pull the bowl away. Now, obviously, again, the dog is tied backwards, so they can't come after us if we start pulling the dog away. If you're really concerned about the risk factor, we've done this before as well. We'll actually duct tape a leash or a piece of rope onto the bowl. We'll push the bowl to the dog, let him start eating, and then we'll just use the rope and pull the bowl back away again and have a look to see what the response is of the dog. That's a good way to start gauging how bad your situation is with your dog. And then finally, on the extreme cases, I'm not a big fan of using medication and using drugs to calm dogs, but a lot of the vets nowadays prescribe that. It does work to some extent, but you have to remember that you're not really training the dog, you're just suppressing that desire. So using narcotics or using drugs, vet prescribed obviously, to calm a dog does make it easier and does take the edge off that resource guarding. Now, when I say that, I'm always got to be real careful. I'm not a vet, but I've seen a lot of dogs. We get, oh gosh, probably well over a couple of 100 dogs a year that come to us that are on medication for some kind of a situation. There's a few vets in town that do a lot of prescribing of that. And that's fine. I have no problem with that as long as it kind of works into the program. But you've still got to do some training with the dog. The narcotic doesn't take away the dog's behavior. All it does is it suppresses that part of the behavior that it exhibits that escalates into a bite. So just keep that in mind if you have a dog that's on that. And then also keep in mind that the dosages are somewhat, if you dose the dog at a certain time every day, but then the next day, one day you're a few hours late, that'll change that dog's behavior in the meantime. You've got to make sure that they swallow the pill properly, that they don't spit it out again. We had a case quite a long time ago where a dog would hold the pill in his mouth and then spit it out like 2 hours later. It was insane. He would like literally hide it in the back of his gum, and I don't know whether he did it whether he did it intentionally, or whether it's just kind of one of those things. But we then had to get to the point of actually sticking it down his throat or using a pill. It's like a tube that you push the pill down with. But when you're working with aggressive dogs, that's not so easy to do either. In some cases like that, I don't want to get too into this side of it because it's much, much more extreme. You're not going to see most of those dogs. And if you do have a dog like that, my suggestion is you come and chat with us first before you take on. The last thing I need is for you to get hurt. But, there are things like that in the medical world that we can use. But we use that as a last resort. We want to see if we can't establish the behavior and establish a training before we get to that. Okay, so that's it. I think Christopher gave me some notes here. Let me just make sure I've gone through. He brings up a really good note here. What if my dog is resource guarding again? So obviously what he's talking about is the dog gets better, dog gets fine, you go through a period of months or years with no issue, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's back again. Remember that a lot of these behaviors are genetic based, right? It could be related to the way it was bred. It could be even further back than that. It could be the personality of that particular type of breed. Some breeds have a high propensity towards that. I'm not going to be breed specific here, but some dogs definitely have more resource guarding issues than others. Some breeds, I should say, have more resource guarding issues than others. So if it happens again, just go back to your basics. Don't be put off by that. It's the same with people. And my favorite analogy always is driving fast, right? One of my trainers today mentioned that she was driving too fast and she got pulled over. And so I was like, well, that's kind of stupid. Why would you do that? I mean, that just stay within the speed that you know you can handle. We all have that problem. But anyways, once you get pulled over, then you have that finite point where, okay, now I'm going to have to keep below the speed limit and so forth, and then you kind of become a little lackadaisical and you become a little bit more relaxed, and then over a period of weeks or days or months even, you start getting back into driving faster, and then of course you have another scare again, or you get pulled over again. So, sometimes behavior is always there. All we're doing is suppressing that behavior and kind of just trying to control it. One of the things that trainers often talk about is, can you correct something like that? And absolutely, the answer is yes. But how you correct is important, because it's not just beating up on the dog. That's for the most part a waste of time, because a lot of these dogs are tough enough to handle that. If you have a real powerful Mal or a German Shepherd or a Bulldog or a Husky or something like that, they don't really care that much about how much you quote unquote punish them. For them, it's about understanding. So you really want to work on your control. Build your foundation up in a positive way, but at the same time letting the dog learn. We call it balance training. Letting them learn that, hey, I'm going to be positive, but there is a consequence if you don't do what you're supposed to do. Okay? So I got a great question here from Michael, and thanks, Michael. I appreciate you tuning in. I love the fact that we get some attention from you guys and that you got some questions, and I'm just reading your question now. I got to come close because I don't have my glasses on. So Michael asks, what's the difference between fear biting and resource guarding? So that's actually a great question, because there's a significant difference. To be honest, you could even say that there's no commonality between the two. So resource guarding is where a dog has an item. It could be food, water, it could be a toy, it could be a human. I didn't mention that, I don't think, earlier on, but you can get, I'll give you a perfect example. If somebody comes walking up to you and they're carrying a little small breed, Chihuahua, Pekingese, one of those dogs, and they're holding it like that, and you reach out to that dog and the dog bites you, what kind of biting is that? Well, that dog could be guarding its owner. And so I should probably mention there's a difference between resource guarding and protecting. They're not protecting the owner because you're not a threat. You might be a threat, but the dog's not reacting to a threat. Dog's reacting to you coming into the owner's space. And because they're in an elevated position, they're being held up high, they give them a lot of power, and they think then they can lunge out and bite. So if you don't believe that theory, then just walk up to somebody that's carrying a small dog and stick your hand out and try and pet the dog and see what happens. Now, I don't really want you to get hurt, but that's the best way for you to learn what the difference is between being protective and resource guarding. Now, what's fear biting? That's what Michael was asking. Fear biting is where a dog lacks confidence. And so what they do, it's almost always a breeding situation, or there could be cases where the dog has been abused in a situation like if a dog has been a rescue, or it was in a bad environment, or it was an environment where somebody was extremely, one day they're positive, next day they're beating up on the dog. Those environments beat up on dogs really significantly. So those things all influence how much the dog is the security level of the dog and the confidence level of the dog. So fear biting almost always applies to a dog that lacks confidence, that lacks socialization, that's insecure because of either breeding or because of learned behavior. And when you reach out to them, they feel that pressure coming in, and they do one of three things. They either fight, which means they bite back at you, or they get all scared and timid and curl up in a ball, or they might sometimes kind of like freeze and just hold position. But obviously what we want them to do is we want them to be social. Not all dogs will be social, and that's something to remember as well, is you cannot force a dog to be social, but it does. If you do your homework and you do your work, that fixes a substantial percentage of the dogs. So, Michael, I hope it answered your question on fear biting. All right, let me see if I've got any other questions. Now, I've got to just change computers here real fast. Over to the other one and look at that. Again, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Check us out on Spotify. Check us out on... Thanks, Michael. Actually, I think I'm better at dog training. Sometimes I question my shooting skills. If you're wondering, Michael's talking about my ability shooting, and he said that I'm as good as to. But I love the dog training. I love shooting as well. But for me, the cool part of working with dogs is seeing people training with their dogs and seeing them having fun and seeing them get along well with their dogs and so forth. On Saturday I was watching class, and just seeing the amount of people. I'll try and get some video of class, and we'll bring it out. We'll try and put it up on our feed the next time. But seeing people working with their dogs and enjoying their dogs, and knowing that some of those dogs have severe behavioral issues. or had severe behavioral issues some time back. You know, dog training is not a perfect science. There's nothing, I wish I could sit here and tell you that. There are people that are going to struggle. There was a gentleman that was struggling with his dog, and I felt bad for him, and I tried to talk to him, but he's still a little bit upset about the dogs. You know, for the most part, when you're training a dog, you've got to look at it from a couple of different directions. One is that, yes, we're all passionate about our pets. We love our pets. We just want to spoil them to death. We want to do as much as we possibly can and make them happy. But on the other side, you're responsible as a parent. You have to teach them. You have to teach them what's acceptable. You got to put that work in. Even if you bring your dog to us in training, and I really hope, and we're kind of pushing some of these videos out to our existing client base. And if you're watching this and you're one of our clients, just understand that it doesn't matter how much training we do on your dogs, you have to follow up with that dog. You know, how many of you know the story? You send your child off to camp, the kid goes off, they make the bed, they're cooking food, they're cleaning their plates, they're acting appropriately, and then they come home and the next day they're not making their bed, they're not tidying up, and they're not listening to their parents. It doesn't mean to say they forgot what they learned in camp. It just means that that same training and establishing the same rules and etiquette and manners and obedience is not happening at home. And that's on you as the parent. So you have to do the same thing with your dog. I can't walk into your home and tell you how to train your dog. Well, I can, and I do, but the point is that it's your dog and it's your home. You have got to take the initiative and you've got to get on with it. Michael was referring to my shooting a second ago, and it's the same thing with me. I'm the #1 ranked senior in the country, mostly because I won the senior title at the US Nationals. But that doesn't count for anything. The next competition, we all start from scratch again. And when I go out and compete this weekend or next month or whatever the case is, I got to go back and train and work harder than most of the other guys out there because I'm a lot older than them. And it's back to that etiquette, and it's back to that passion and that enthusiasm to succeed. And that's what makes us successful as dog trainers. So just remember that. All right, I can't pull up the other thing. I think that's because I'm running it off one computer right now. So if you've sent another question I didn't answer you on the show, I will go back as soon as I get off and I will answer the questions for you later on. Again, I want to thank you guys for signing in and for watching. Aaron, thank you. Michael, thank you. I saw Mary was on here a little bit earlier on as well. Man, I wish I could get back to those names again. I got to find a better way to do this so I can actually monitor that. But, you know, thanks again, guys. Really appreciate your input and your time. And we look forward to seeing you next week. So have a great evening. And next week, 6 o'clock. And probably then we'll have the new times worked out. Have a great evening. Cheers.